Real love is supposed to be built on mutual compromise and open, honest communication. Instead, Ava only knew how to use the silent treatment, block my number, and throw tantrums, constantly dumping her negative energy on me. I had literally been injured for her sake, yet she used it as leverage for emotional blackmail while everyone else just enabled her toxic behavior. It was only when I stopped groveling and finally stood my ground that the truth about who the real victim was in our 7-year relationship came to light. Most couples spend their time being affectionate and close, keeping the fire in their relationship alive. In my world, however, Ava always treated me with a cold indifference, acting as if she could barely be bothered to acknowledge my existence. To make matters worse, she constantly reminded me that she gave her virginity to me as if it were a debt I could never repay. She used that to insist that I had to obey her every whim and put her needs above my own at all times. Anything less was framed as a betrayal of her ultimate devotion. When her latest silent treatment finally hit a breaking point, I decided I wasn't going to be the one to go crawling back with an apology this time. My friend tried to talk me down, telling me that she was just being temperamental and that she didn't actually mean the cruel thing she said. They told me all I had to do was sweet talk her and everything would go back to normal. But the truth was that I was exhausted and I was done with the constant cycle of swallowing my pride. For years, she had been emotionally manipulating me, using the threat of a breakup as a weapon whenever she didn't get her way. She also constantly brought up how difficult it is for women to go through childbirth, even though we weren't even close to that stage, and I was sick of the constant guilt trips. So when she tried to use that old threat to scare me again, I looked her in the eye and told her we should just end it. The second those words left my mouth, Ava froze, clearly caught off guard by my sudden backbone. I didn't even look up at her. I just kept scrolling through my phone and spoke with a level of calm that surprised even me. I told her I would pack up my things and find a new place as soon as possible. I said she could keep everything we bought together to do with as she pleased, and I wouldn't even ask for my half of the security deposit back. The room went deathly silent, and my voice was the only thing cutting through the tension. Ava's face shifted from a look of insulted disbelief to one of absolute, icy detachment. She cut me off abruptly and asked about Cheddar, demanding to know what would happen to him. Cheddar was a stray cat that Ava had found near the entrance of our apartment complex in Seattle. She was the one who insisted on adopting him, but I was the one who actually did the work, paying the vet bills and buying the food. Despite everything, the cat never liked me. Most of the time, he would just hiss and growl at me from across the room. He had even lunged at me a few times, leaving deep scratches on my wrists. With Ava, however, he was a completely different animal. All she had to do was reach out, and Cheddar would come running, purring and rubbing against her legs. I told her she should keep him. I let out a long sigh, because even though I cared about the cat, the blatant favoritism was hard to ignore, and it honestly hurt a little. Suddenly, she yelled my name. Ava struggled to keep her voice steady as she reminded me that I was the one who missed Valentine's Day, and now I was the one acting like the victim. I didn't even know how to respond to that. Ava was the one who constantly used the threat of a breakup, not me. She probably didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. It had just become her go-to move because it had worked so well in the past. I sighed and reminded her that I had already explained the flight delay that kept me from getting home on time. Ava just scoffed, telling me that anyone could make up excuses and asking why I hadn't just booked an earlier flight. I had worked 18 hours straight on that trip, just so I could finish everything early and catch the red-eye home to see her. To Ava, my effort and exhaustion meant absolutely nothing. She would always find 100 different ways to make everything my fault. I stopped talking as a wave of complete exhaustion and hopelessness washed over me. Ava headed toward the door, but paused to tell me she would only come back once I realized I was wrong. I told her again that it didn't matter because we were finished. She ignored me completely, just tilting her head and telling me she was giving me one last chance to fix things. She said her anger went way beyond me just being late. This was actually the first time she had ever been so direct about her feelings. Usually, she would just slam the door or scream something cruel before vanishing for the night. Even with her arrogant tone, she told me to think long and hard before coming to her with an apology. I sat on the couch for hours, my head throbbing and my limbs feeling incredibly heavy. Eventually, I forced myself up to start cleaning the disaster area she had left to the living room. I even reached into the trash to retrieve the gift she had thrown away without a second thought. I had spent my only free afternoon in London going from shop to find the perfect thing for her. I must have visited 20 stores before I found it, but she hadn't even bothered to open the box. She never gave it a chance, let alone valued the effort I put into it. It sat there in the middle of the mess, looking as worthless as the rest of the trash on the floor. Once the living room was decent, I went into the bedroom to start packing my life into boxes. We had rented this place together, and every corner was filled with reminders of the last few years. There were the mugs we chose together, the blankets we shared, and the matching sets of dishes we were so proud of buying. I packed only my essentials, zipped up my suitcase, and headed straight for the front door. As I reached for the handle, an orange blur darted in front of me, cutting me off. Cheddar flopped down right in the middle of the hallway, refusing to budge an inch. He just sat there, his bright green eyes staring intently up at me. When Ava first brought him home, he was so thin you could see every rib. He was covered in grime and clearly suffering from a long time on the streets. Now his coat was thick and healthy, and he had filled out into a sturdy, well-cared-for cat. I knelt down beside him, and for once, he didn't run away or hiss at me. I gently reached out and stroked the top of his head. I whispered to him that I was leaving and that he would have to rely on her from now on. I figured Cheddar would be happy about it. He had always preferred Ava anyway. To him, I was probably just the guy who filled the food bowl. I gently unhooked his claws from my jeans and ignored his sudden, frantic meowing as I walked out the door and didn't look back. My phone started buzzing just as I cleared the front gate of the complex. It was Chloe, Ava's best friend, and she sounded like she was ready for a fight before I even said hello. "James, what the hell did you do to Ava this time? She is absolutely losing it and is currently down at the bar drinking alone, refusing to talk to anyone. You need to get down here and get her before she ends up trashing my entire place." I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me and told her I had no idea what Ava was even upset about. I explained that she had started screaming and throwing things the second I walked through the door. Chloe went quiet for a moment before her voice went up an octave in disbelief, asking if I was serious. She told me that Ava had seen me out at dinner with another woman and then saw me dropping her off at a hotel. I explained that it was a business dinner with a major client from out of town. It was pouring rain and she couldn't get an Uber, so I gave her a lift back to her hotel because it was on my way. So that was what this whole meltdown was actually about. Ava had always been possessive, getting worked up if I even had a polite conversation with another woman. I used to tell myself it was just because she loved me and was afraid of losing me. Now, I didn't feel loved, I just felt completely drained. I told Chloe that I could explain the situation easily. I lowered my voice and told her I didn't understand why Ava always ran to her friends instead of just talking to me. I was tired of being expected to be a mind reader. I remember asking a friend how he and his girlfriend handled their arguments. He told me they just waited until they were both calm and then sat down to talk through whose fault it was. But Ava was never that kind of person. She refused to be logical, and she absolutely hated any form of real communication. She would bottle everything up until she exploded, leaving me guessing what had set her off this time. I was forced to either guess or go on a fact-finding mission with her friends just to understand why she was mad. I couldn't understand why she found it so difficult to just be honest with me. It baffled me that she would rather vent to everyone else than come to the one person who could actually fix the problem. Eventually, I realized that she was just fundamentally emotionally stunted. Ava was the most difficult and complicated woman I had ever had the misfortune of loving. She was hypersensitive and completely unpredictable, pulling away the second things got uncomfortable. She lived for sarcasm and used it as a way to test my loyalty. A friend once told me that women like her were more trouble than they were worth in a relationship. He warned me that I would spend my entire life chasing after her and trying to fix her moods. I didn't listen back then, I was too convinced that my love could change her. Looking back, I realized I was just slowly being eroded until there was nothing left of me. No relationship can survive if only one person is doing all the work to stay close. I moved into my old bachelor pad, but while our private lives were separate, we still worked at the same research firm. We both worked at the Institute in Seattle, though we were in completely different wings. During project briefing, I noticed a younger guy waving to her across the room. His name was Ethan Davis, a new hire who had just started a few months ago. I saw Ava's expression brighten the second she spotted me in the hallway. I made a point of not looking at her, keeping my focus entirely on finishing my report. I could see the hope in her eyes vanish, replaced by a cold, hard stare. She looked straight ahead and walked right past me without acknowledging my presence. I overheard Ethan asking one of the senior researchers about the long scar on Ava's arm. Someone whispered back to him that Ava and I were the office's golden couple. Everyone at the lab thought we were the perfect match. They told him she had gotten that scar during a major structural fire back in college. Apparently, I'd been trapped and Ava had refused to leave my side, getting injured while trying to save me. The story was that she was a hero who had sacrificed herself for me. Word was that she had to give up her dreams of being a surgeon because of the nerve damage in her arm. Because of her sacrifice, she had to switch to research instead of going to med school. That was why she had ended up working at the Institute with me. Ethan sounded genuinely impressed, saying that any man would be lucky to have a woman that devoted. I just kept walking, unable to find the words to correct them. The rest of the staff joined in, talking about how much Ava had given up for our relationship. They painted a picture of a woman who had abandoned her destiny just to stay by my side. Everyone was convinced that her love for me was something out of a movie. One of the guys joked that I must have been a saint in a past life to deserve her. To them, our current silence was just some cute lover's quarrel that we'd get over in a day. One colleague laughed and bet that I would be the first one to cave and apologize like I always did. A young intern chimed in, saying she hoped my apology involved bringing in cupcakes for everyone again. Someone else protested that it wasn't a fair bet. They joked that since I always gave in, the real gamble would be betting on Ava to apologize for once. I stood there in the shadows, listening to them turn my miserable relationship into a game. Little did they know, the game was finally over. I stepped into the light and told them flat out that Ava and I were done for good. I told them to stop making jokes about a relationship that no longer existed. The room went silent the moment I spoke. After a few awkward seconds of staring, everyone suddenly found something very important to do elsewhere. The reality was that our relationship was far from the fairy tale they imagined. Years of silent treatment and screaming matches had left us both bitter and hollowed out. We were standing on a foundation that had been crumbling for a long time. I was curious to see if Ava would actually try to fix things now that I wasn't the one holding the glue. I wondered if she was even capable of saying the words, "I'm sorry" first. An entire month went by with Ava and me acting like total strangers, neither of us saying a word. The tension in the office was thick as we both waited to see who would break first. Meanwhile, Ava and Ethan Davis seemed to be getting closer by the day. They started getting lunch together and walking out to the parking lot at the end of the day. When the department organized a hiking trip to Mount Rainier, Ava made a point of pairing up with him. Ethan seemed a little uncomfortable with it, asking her if it was really a good idea given our history. He kept looking over at me as if he expected me to snap. Ava just told him coldly that since we were broken up, I didn't have any say in what she did or who she did it with. She didn't even try to lower her voice, making sure everyone in the vicinity heard her loud and clear. She added with a scoff that I was probably out with some other woman anyway. She suggested to the group that I was probably on a private hike with someone else right then. I could feel the judgment in everyone's eyes the moment she said it. Someone muttered under their breath about how I was a fool for throwing away a woman like Ava for some random girl. They all seemed to agree that I was the reason the relationship had failed. As soon as I got close, the group broke apart and scurried away, acting as if they hadn't been gossiping about me seconds ago. Partway up the trail, there was a steep section that required a bit of a scramble. Ethan reached out to help Ava up, but he lost his footing and they both went tumbling down a small embankment. They both ended up with some pretty nasty scrapes and bruises. Ethan was horrified, apologizing profusely and blaming himself for Ava's twisted ankle. Ava was surprisingly sweet about it, telling him it was her own clumsiness that had caused the fall. She actually told him that she was the one who should be apologizing. She told him that the hike was just for fun and that it didn't matter if they finished last. I stood a few yards back, listening to her being the most reasonable person on the planet. I intentionally slowed my pace to keep a comfortable distance between us. Since we had an odd number of people, everyone had already paired off, leaving me to hike solo. I didn't mind being alone. It was actually peaceful for once. I took my time, enjoying the fresh air and trying to clear my head. That was how I ended up with a front row seat to their little accident. They had been chatting and laughing the whole time, looking like the perfect pair. I even heard another hiker comment on how incredibly sweet and kind Ava seemed. Ava could be sweet and she could be kind, but she reserved that version of herself for everyone except the man she was actually dating. I had asked her once why she treated me so differently than her friends or strangers. Her excuse was always that she had warned me about her bad temper before we started dating. She seemed to think that giving me a warning gave her a lifelong pass to be as cruel and dismissive as she wanted. The whole heroic sacrifice story everyone kept bringing up was even more of a joke. There was no disaster, it was just a routine fire drill back at the University of Washington. She was the student representative for our department back then. When the alarm went off, everyone headed for the exits as they were supposed to. But she was the only one who came running toward my desk. I actually did have a broken leg at the time, so I was stuck waiting for the crowds to clear. She ignored my protests and forced me to lean on her as we slowly shuffled toward the door. The image of her saving me spread like wildfire across the campus. Every guy on campus was jealous, telling me I had hit the jackpot with a girl like her. There were even posts on the school's Reddit page about how she was the ultimate partner. The comments were a total battlefield of people arguing about relationship standards. Girls were joking about how men never appreciate the good ones they have. The guys were adamant that a woman like that should be protected and cherished at all costs. The reality was that while we were walking, Ava was absolutely tearing into me. She didn't stop berating me for a single second during that entire walk. She was yelling about why I even bothered coming to class with a broken leg. She blamed me for making our department look bad by being the last ones to evacuate. She told me I was completely useless and that I ruined everything I touched. I kept trying to tell her that I was already excused from the drill and that she should have just left without me. But she had been determined to drag me out of that chair whether I wanted to or not. I told her to just save herself, but she completely ignored me. She just stood there pulling on my arm and using me as a punching bag for her frustration. Eventually, I got so tired of her screaming that I just stood up and let her rescue me just to get some peace. Only then did she finally shut up. Later, Chloe told me that Ava's harsh words were just her way of showing she cared. She claimed that Ava was actually terrified for me and didn't know how to express it. She said Ava was just upset that I hadn't stayed home to recover. She even told me a story about how Ava burned her hands trying to make me soup. My friends told me she was just a bit dramatic and had a lot of big feelings. They insisted that despite everything, she really did love me. They said that with a girl as proud and sensitive as her, I just needed to be more patient. But now, watching her be so sweet and attentive to Ethan Davis, I finally saw the truth. She didn't have a bad temper. She just had a bad temper when it came to me. Every time I heard about how much she loved me, it was through someone else's filter. In our actual day-to-day life, I never felt a shred of that supposed love. She used me as a dumping ground for her anger and punished me with weeks of silence. She was constantly looking for reasons to be disappointed in me. She told me I was a failure and that I would never amount to anything. She made sure I knew that I was failing to provide the lifestyle she deserved. She had once shredded a scarf a friend gave me and smashed a PlayStation I had borrowed from a coworker. Back then, I was stupid enough to think she was just insecure and needed more reassurance. But after being shut out and ignored every time I tried to talk to her, I started brainwashing myself into believing I was the problem and began apologizing for things I didn't even do. I became a shell of myself, constantly begging for her forgiveness. Love can't survive in a vacuum. It needs to be a two-way street. I wasn't some perfect saint who could take endless abuse. I was a human being who was hurting. From the outside, it's hard to tell the difference between someone who is emotionally complex and someone who just doesn't love you anymore. I was too exhausted to care which one it was. I didn't care if Ava was just complicated or if she had stopped loving me years ago. I stopped right there on the trail and told the department head that I was heading back early. I texted my supervisor, making up some excuse about a sudden migraine. Back in my apartment, I gathered every last bit of clothing Ava had left behind and packed it into a shipping box. I scheduled a FedEx pickup to have it all sent to her place. Once the box was gone, I sat on my couch in the silence of my own home. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and typed out a text to her. It was short and to the point, telling her that we were officially over. The last time I said it, a part of me was still hoping she would fight for me or apologize. I had been waiting for years for her to finally see what she was doing to me and say she was sorry. This time, however, the flame was completely out. The message wouldn't go through, and I realized that she had blocked me on iMessage again. It was her signature move, blocking me on everything the second she got angry. I sighed and realized I'd have to use Chloe as a go-between one last time. I used to hate it when she used her friends to talk to me, and now I was forced to do the exact same thing. While I was on Facebook looking for Chloe's contact info, I accidentally scrolled past one of Ava's recent posts. It was a photo of her at the beach from a few days ago. Right in the middle of the shot were Ava and Ethan Davis. Ethan had a huge grin on his face, and his arm was draped casually around her shoulders. Ava was smiling too, that small, knowing smile she used when she was getting exactly what she wanted. The post was from a week ago, right in the middle of our biggest fallout. I looked at the picture for a long time before I finally hit the like button. She used to tell me that she preferred traveling by herself. She claimed that going on trips with me was always a miserable experience. She would complain about my photography and tell me that I was too stupid to pick up on her subtle cues. We hadn't taken a vacation together in over 2 years. I finally realized it wasn't my camera skills she hated, it was me. It seemed that as soon as a better option like Ethan came along, I became obsolete. She would pick a fight just to have an excuse to spend time with him during our breaks. People say that when a woman truly loves you, she's cold to the world and soft only for you. With Ava, it was the exact opposite. Around Ethan Davis, she was the picture of sweetness and light. When she looked at me, there was always an invisible wall of ice that I could never break through. I had been such a fool, too blind to see that she had checked out of our relationship a long time ago. I needed to get away, so I took a week off and booked a flight to San Francisco. San Francisco was beautiful, and the food scene was exactly what I needed to distract myself. I was walking through a quiet neighborhood in the Sunset District when I struck up a conversation with an older woman sitting on her porch. I asked her if she ever got tired of living in the same place her entire life. She just smiled and told me that this was her home, and she felt nothing but pride watching her city grow. She said she could never get tired of a place she loved so much. I realized then that while scenery might get old, love shouldn't. If you truly care about something, you don't just wake up one day and decide it's a burden. I was surprised when my phone lit up with Ava's name on the 3rd day of my trip. She must have unblocked me at some point during the night. She sounded as cold as ever, asking me what kind of food she was supposed to buy for Cheddar. I gave her the brand name and told her she could have just looked it up online. I told her there was no reason for her to be calling me for something so simple. Ava ignored my comment and just said she had already thrown the old bag in the trash. Then she asked what she should do if the cat broke his scratching post. I sat there in disbelief for a second before telling her to just buy a new one. She complained that Cheddar had gotten out and was covered in mud. I told her to just take him to a groomer and be done with it. She kept firing off these mundane questions, and I answered them all with as much patience as I could muster. Once she ran out of questions, an awkward silence settled over the line. I waited for her to say something, but she just stayed silent, so I finally spoke up. I told her I was going to go and that she should stop calling me. I told her that Google existed and she didn't need me to be her personal assistant for the cat. Just as I was about to hit the end call button, Ava's voice came through, soft and hesitating. She told me that Cheddar missed me and asked if I was ever coming back to see him. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. Our jobs at the Institute required us to travel quite a bit. Whenever Ava came home from a trip, the cat would be waiting at the door, purring and acting like she was the center of the universe. When I came home, I usually had to go hunting for him under the bed. Usually, the only look Cheddar gave me was one of utter contempt. He would usually just flick his tail and walk away unless I had a handful of treats to bribe him with. There was no way that cat actually missed me, and we both knew it. I told her he was her cat now and that I didn't have any interest in coming over. I felt a sense of relief the second the call ended. I couldn't tell if she was just lonely or if Cheddar was finally becoming the burden I always knew he would be for her. Ava had always been someone who acted on impulse. She adopted that cat because it made her feel like a saint for a day, but she never wanted the actual responsibility. Now that the novelty had worn off, the daily care was just another chore she hated. I couldn't stop thinking about it that night, staring at the ceiling of my hotel room. Around 3 a.m, I finally broke down and grabbed my phone. I typed out a message telling her that if the cat was too much for her, I would take him. I hovered over the send button for what felt like an hour. I was genuinely worried that if she got frustrated enough, she might just dump him back on the street. I'd rather he live with me and hate me than be abandoned again. At least I could give him a stable home for the rest of his life. Even though it was the middle of the night, she replied the instant the message was delivered. She asked if I really wanted the cat and if I was seriously planning on taking him with me. Before I could even type a response, she sent another text asking about herself. A second later, the message was deleted. I stared at the blank space where the text had been, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. A few minutes later, she sent a much more composed message. She told me to send my address and said she would drop the cat off. I met her at a Starbucks near the park, where she was already waiting by the window with a cat carrier. She tried to cover it up with makeup, but the exhaustion on her face was unmistakable. I was surprised she had made it down to San Francisco so quickly. It looked like she had jumped in her car the moment she saw my text. The second Cheddar saw me, he started fighting to get out of her lap. When I set him down, he stayed right by my feet, looking up at me with an intensity one had never seen from him. He had never been this close to me before. He was actually meowing softly and rubbing his head against my leg as if we were best friends. I didn't buy it. I just opened the carrier and nudged him inside. I wasn't in the mood to play along with his sudden change of heart. My arm was still covered in the scratches he had given me right before I left Seattle. My patience for both of them was non-existent. I grabbed the handle of the carrier and started to walk away, but Ava put a hand on my arm. She looked down and admitted she finally knew the woman at the hotel was just a business associate. She actually apologized for blowing up at me without having all the facts. She explained the photo with Ethan Davis, saying it was just a chance encounter while she was out with her friends. I stood there and listened to her explain everything. She clearly thought that my jealousy was the only thing standing between us. She was completely missing the point. Our relationship had been dead long before Ethan Davis ever showed up. It took her forever to get the words out, but she finally whispered that she was sorry for the last fight. She looked incredibly embarrassed, her entire face flushing a deep red. She bit her lip again, looking like a child who had just been scolded. She was putting on her best act to make me feel sorry for her. I looked at her and asked why it had taken 7 years for her to finally say those words. I wanted to know why she was so allergic to taking responsibility for her actions. To Ava, an apology wasn't about fixing things, it was about losing a battle. If she thought apologizing was losing, then she must have thought I was a total loser for all the times I had swallowed my pride for her. I realized I'd spent 7 years being her doormat. Ava's eyes filled with tears as she told me she thought I understood how she felt. She claimed she had just been waiting for me to fix things and that she never actually wanted us to end. She admitted she just wanted me to beg for her attention again. Her voice broke as she started to cry in earnest. She asked how I could be so cold and just walk away after everything we had been through. She couldn't believe I was willing to throw away 7 years of history. She accused me of caring more about the cat than I did about her. I was too tired to even argue with her anymore. She actually believed I was just playing the same game she did. I tried to explain that if you threaten to leave enough times, eventually someone is going to take you up on it. I told her that Ethan Davis had nothing to do with my decision. The problem was her, and it always had been. I told her she was impossible to talk to and that she never listened to a word I said. She was constantly creating drama and then running away whenever things got real. Ava glared at me and said that those were all just convenient excuses to leave her. She claimed that if I really loved her, I would be willing to put up with anything. She stood there crying, telling me over and over that I just didn't love her enough. She made it sound like I was the one who had failed her. I was so stunned by her lack of self-awareness that I couldn't even form a sentence. I had spent 7 years of my life being the only one trying to make things work. And yet, here she was casting me as the villain who didn't care. I asked her to name one single thing she had ever changed about herself for the sake of our relationship. I reminded her that I had stayed for as long as I did because I loved her. I told her I knew all about her insecurities and her emotional baggage. I had spent years walking on eggshells just to keep her happy. I never used the word breakup because I knew her pride would never let her come back from it. She, on the other hand, used it constantly because she knew I would always be the one to cave. I had tried to be the rock she needed, the one person who would never leave her. But I finally realized that being her emotional anchor was dragging me under. I was willing to go all the way for her, but she couldn't even meet me halfway. Hearing her say I didn't love her enough was the final nail in the coffin for my feelings. I had absolutely nothing left to give her. We had spent 7 years tearing each other apart until there was nothing left but scars. It's a sad truth that the people who know us best are the ones who know exactly how to hurt us the most. In that moment, I decided to stop being the bigger person. I looked her straight in the eyes and spoke with absolute clarity. I told Ava that she was impossible to live with and that no one would ever truly love her. I told her she simply didn't deserve to be loved by anyone. When I got back to Seattle, the first thing I did was apply for a transfer to our Chicago office. My request was approved quickly, and within a month, I was on a flight to Chicago. The Chicago lab had much better resources and was a huge step up for my career. Ethan Davis caught me in the parking lot on my last day, looking like he was about to cry. He started stammering about how the encounter at the beach had been a complete accident. He said Ava had been a mess and her friends had just been trying to cheer her up. I barely looked at him as I finished throwing the last of my things into my car. I told him that he didn't owe me anything. I said the only person who should be apologizing was Ava, but we both knew she never would. Ethan didn't have a clue what he was getting into, but I knew Ava better than anyone. Ava was actually incredibly loyal, almost to a fault. I knew she would never actually cheat on me. All that flirting with Ethan was just a calculated move to make me jealous enough to come crawling back. It was a game she only played with me because she knew exactly which buttons to push. I had tried to play her games in the past just to see if it would make a difference. I tried talking to other women just to see if she would finally realize how much she had to lose. I was hoping it would force her to grow up and stop acting like a spoiled brat. It never worked. She would just lock me out of the apartment and cut me off entirely. She'd even coordinate with her friends to make sure I was blocked on every possible platform. I realized then that you can't play games with someone who is a professional at them. Ava was never going to change, no matter what I did. If I pulled away an inch, she would move a mile just to prove she could. The only reason we had lasted 7 years was because I was the only one holding on. I was the only one with any skin in the game. In Chicago, I quickly made a new circle of friends who loved being outdoors. We spent our weekends hiking in Wisconsin or skiing in Michigan. I realized I couldn't even remember the last time I'd felt this genuinely happy. Before Ava, I was an adventurous, outgoing guy who was always up for trying something new. Over the years, Ava had started hiding my passport and ID whenever I planned a trip without her. She would always belittle my hobbies, asking why I couldn't just stay home and be a normal person. She told me that my love for travel was immature and that I needed to grow up. She made me feel guilty for having any interests that didn't involve her. She claimed that every hour I spent on my hobbies was an hour I was stealing from her. My old friends in Seattle used to tell me that she was just worried about my safety. They said she was just terrified that I would get hurt doing something dangerous like skiing. They convinced me that her controlling behavior was just her way of showing love. I eventually caved and gave up everything I loved just to keep the peace. Now, I was flying down a mountain in Colorado, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My new friend were cheering behind me, yelling about how I should have gone pro. We were all laughing and having the time of our lives. If there was a disagreement, we talked it out and moved on. Nobody was keeping score. I hadn't felt this free or this appreciated in years. I finally felt like I could breathe again, and the weight I'd been carrying for 7 years finally started to lift. I was completely blindsided when I saw Ava standing outside my new apartment in Chicago. She was standing there all by herself, looking small and out of place. She looked like she had been waiting for hours, her face pale from the Chicago winter. Her face lit up the second she saw me, but she slowed down as she got closer, looking unsure of herself. The second she noticed the snowboard in my hands, her expression shifted back to that familiar scowl. She looked like she was about to explode and didn't even bother with a greeting. She immediately started yelling at me about how many times she had told me to quit skiing. She started reciting statistics about ski accidents and how dangerous it was. She asked if I was looking forward to spending the rest of my life in a wheelchair. Her voice was getting louder and louder, attracting attention from people on the street. She called me an idiot for continuing to pursue my hobbies. She demanded to know why I couldn't just stay out of trouble when she wasn't around to supervise me. Before I could say a word, she lunged forward, grabbed my board, and smashed it onto the concrete. The board snapped with a loud crack, and several people stopped to stare at the scene. Ava's public meltdown was making everyone uncomfortable. A guy walking his dog stopped and asked me if I was being harassed and if I needed him to call the police. He said he had the whole thing on video if I wanted to file a report. The suggestion that she was some kind of criminal sent Ava into a total frenzy. She started screaming at the poor guy to mind his own business and get lost. Then she turned back to me and tried to take a swing at my face. I caught her wrist before she could connect and push her back a few steps. I thanked the guy for his help, but told him I had the situation under control. I pulled out my own phone and looked at Ava with a total lack of emotion. I told her that I was calling the Chicago police. I told her that she was the one who was out of control and that I was done playing her games. We sat in silence at the precinct, waiting for the duty officer to process the paperwork. The officer tried to downplay it as a lover's quarrel and suggested we just go home and talk. He told me I should just be the bigger man and let it go. I didn't let him finish his sentence. I told him that being in a relationship didn't give one person the right to abuse the other. I pointed out that if I had broken her property, I'd be in handcuffs and the same rules should apply to her. I told him that as the victim of property damage and attempted assault, I was the only one who got to decide if we settled. I made it very clear that we were not a couple and that this wasn't a domestic issue. I was there as a citizen to file a formal complaint for the destruction of my property. I told him I was sick of people trying to sweep toxic behavior under the rug just because of gender. I said I was done with the idea that being an ex-girlfriend gave her a free pass to harass me. I asked him if the law only applied when it wasn't inconvenient for his paperwork. I asked why I was the one expected to be patient while she was the one acting like a criminal. I told him that if he wasn't going to do his job, the law didn't mean anything. The officer finally got the message, dropped the patronizing tone, and started writing up the actual report. In the end, Ava was forced to pay a fine, reimburse me for the board, and sign a formal restraining order. As she was leaving, she turned to the officer and gave him a soft, apologetic look. She apologized for her behavior and promised she would never do it again. I stood there and watched her put on her little show. It was classic Ava. She was perfectly capable of being polite to people who had power over her. She could be the most charming, humble person in the world when she needed to be. But with me, every single apology was treated like some kind of ultimate sacrifice. The people who loved her most were always the ones who got the worst of her. I tried to walk away, but Ava wasn't finished and came running after me. She kept begging me to just sit down and talk to her. I told her I would give her 10 minutes, but only if she promised to leave Chicago and never contact me again. She hesitated for a second before nodding in agreement. We went into a Pete's Coffee, and I ordered a black coffee. Ava immediately made a face and told me that nobody drinks iced coffee in the middle of a Chicago winter. She said she would never even think of ordering something so cold. I just looked at her until she finally shut up. I told her my drink was none of her business and that she should just worry about her own order. She looked like she wanted to argue, but managed to hold it in. Once we were seated, I told her she had 10 minutes and to get to the point. She tried to look soft and approachable as she brushed her hair back. She told me she had spent a lot of time reflecting on our relationship. She admitted that everything I had said during the breakup was actually true. She confessed that she had been impossible to live with and that her communication skills were non-existent. She promised me that she was willing to change everything about herself. She looked at me with those pleading eyes and made her final pitch. She begged me to take her back and promised she would be a better person. It had taken 7 years of misery for her to finally say what I needed to hear. But the truth was that those words didn't mean anything to me anymore. I looked her in the eye and told her it was never going to happen. She looked panicked and immediately pulled up her sleeve to show me her scar. She held up her arm, showing me the reminder of her sacrifice. That scar had been her ultimate weapon for years, the thing she used to keep me in line. She would always bring it up whenever I tried to stand up for myself, telling me how much she had lost for my sake. It used to work every time, making me feel so guilty that I would end up apologizing to her. This time, I felt absolutely nothing. I waited for her to finish her little performance before I spoke. I told her I knew that she never would have made it into medical school anyway. I had recently found out from one of her old college friends that she was actually terrified of blood. Her failing to become a doctor had absolutely nothing to do with her arm. She had used her own failure as a way to guilt-trip me for nearly a decade. I told her how exhausting it had been to carry the weight of her fake sacrifice on my shoulders. She had spent our entire relationship acting like I owed her my life. Everyone we knew thought I was the luckiest guy in the world and that I should put up with anything she did. I had let her treat me like garbage because I was too blinded by guilt to see the truth. Every time I tried to leave, people would remind me of what she had given up for me. They would tell me I was being ungrateful and that I needed to be more patient. I had been brainwashed into thinking her abuse was just the price I had to pay. Ava tried to switch tactics, bringing up her difficult childhood and her parents. She claimed that her parents had never loved her and that she didn't know any better. She reminded me that I was her first love and the only man she had ever cared about. She said she simply didn't know how to be a good partner because she had never seen one. I told her that was the oldest excuse in the book. I told her that being bad at love was something you worked on, not an excuse to be cruel. I told her she had spent years lying to me and manipulating me like I was some kind of idiot. I asked her if she really thought I was that stupid or if she just thought I had no self-respect left. She started crying again, telling me that wasn't true. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. She whispered that she was just so insecure that she didn't know how to act any other way. She used her insecurity as a shield for her toxic behavior for years. It was her excuse for why she could never be the partner I needed. She was so afraid of me leaving that she made sure I felt too guilty to ever walk away. I told her that everyone has baggage, but not everyone uses it to hurt the people they love. I told her that being insecure explained why she was sensitive, but not why she was cruel. I told her that she could have chosen to work on herself at any point in the last 7 years. I asked her why her feelings were the only ones that ever mattered in our relationship. I told her I was done paying the price for her emotional instability. She had known she was the problem for years, but had chosen to be a victim instead of fixing it. I told her that her behavior wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of absolute selfishness. I used her own favorite line against her one last time. I told her that if she really loved me, she would have cared enough to not destroy me. I didn't see or hear from Ava for months after our meeting in Chicago. She actually seemed to be respecting the restraining order and my request for no contact. I threw myself into my work at the Chicago Institute. I started signing up for every amateur athletic event I could find. During a half marathon along Lake Michigan, a guy I was passing actually tried to shove me off the path. I didn't let it slide. I reported him to the race officials and got him disqualified immediately. He was a total hothead and started following me after the race, looking for a fight. I was walking back to my car when I heard a motorcycle engine revving behind me. I didn't even have time to turn around before the bike was right on top of me. I felt a sudden shove that sent me flying onto the grass. I looked up to see Ava lying on the pavement where I had been standing a second ago. She had pushed me out of the way and taken the hit herself. Her arm was twisted at a sickening angle. She looked at me for a split second before looking away, her face tight with pain. She was covered in sweat and shaking, but the only thing she said was a whispered apology. I stayed with her at the emergency room while they set her arm and put in a cast. I didn't say anything. I just watched the doctors work. Once the room was empty, I finally looked at her. I told her the police were investigating the guy on the motorcycle and would be in touch. I told her my insurance would cover her medical bills and that the perpetrator would be held liable. I put a bottle of water on her bedside table and turned to go. She called out my name before I could reach the door, asking me how I was doing. She sounded pathetic as she asked if her sacrifice was really worth nothing to me. I stopped at the door, but I didn't turn around. I asked her if she was really trying to pull the same guilt trip on me again. I asked her if she was ever going to stop trying to manipulate my feelings. She looked like I had slapped her, and she started stammering out an explanation. She claimed she didn't mean it that way and just wanted to talk to me one last time. I took a deep breath and finally turned to face her. My total lack of anger seemed to hurt her more than anything else could have. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated grief. She asked me if I really thought she was that heartless. She asked if she really meant nothing to me after all those years. I didn't have anything left to say, and my silence told her everything she needed to know. You can't just erase 7 years of emotional abuse with one grand gesture. I couldn't look at her without seeing all the times she had used her pain to control me. I had reached a point where I couldn't even trust her heroics because I was always looking for the ulterior motive. Once trust is gone, there's no way to build anything on top of the ruins. Trying to fix our relationship was like trying to pick up spilled water. It was just a mess that was never going to be clean again. I could hear a couple arguing out in the hallway, their voices high and angry. Inside the room, the silence was so heavy it felt like we were underwater. Ava took a long, shaky breath before she spoke. She told me she had actually come to Chicago to say a final goodbye. She admitted she finally realized that she was the one with the issues. She said she had spent years in denial about her toxic behavior. She told me she was taking a position at our London office next month. She promised me she was going to start therapy and really work on herself. She sounded like she actually meant it this time. She was shaking and the tears were pouring down her face as she spoke. She was desperately trying to keep it together, but she was a total wreck. She looked at me with a desperate kind of hope that made her look years younger. She asked if there was any chance for us if she actually managed to change. She asked if I could ever love the person she was trying to become. She begged me to give her just one more shot at making things right. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I used to be such a believer in the idea that love could overcome anything. I had spent years planning a life with her, thinking we were going to grow old together. We didn't have any of the usual problems, no cheating or outside drama, but we still managed to destroy each other anyway. I finally understood that even the strongest love has its breaking point. On a random Tuesday in a hospital room, she finally asked for the one thing I couldn't give her. I told her that it was too late and that we were better off apart. I realized that a relationship only works if both people are pulling in the same direction. I had spent 7 years chasing after her while she never even looked back. Now that she was finally ready to try, I was already gone and there was nothing left for her to hold on to. I did love her with everything I had, but I was also completely and utterly done with loving her. I finally let go of the rope, and for the first time in 7 years, I was free. I ran into Chloe and a few of Ava's other friends as I was leaving the hospital. They all looked incredibly awkward when they saw me coming down the hall. I gave them a quick nod and tried to walk past, but Chloe blocked my path. She hesitated for a second before she finally spoke up. James, why did you go and block every single one of us? I simply told her that Ava and I were no longer together, and that was the end of it. Chloe wouldn't let it go, arguing that just because I broke up with Ava didn't mean I had to stop being friends with the rest of the group. The other girls in the group started chiming in, acting as if my decision to cut them off was some kind of personal insult to them. When I didn't immediately cave or offer an apology, the chatter slowly died down into an awkward silence. I looked at them and asked if they honestly believed our relationship had ever been a real friendship. I asked why they always felt the need to swarm me every time we had a fight, demanding that I be the one to apologize. They were always the first to tell me that being right didn't matter as much as making sure Ava was happy. Chloe looked confused and whispered that they were just trying to help us stay together. She insisted that as friends, it was their job to encourage us to work through our problems. She tried to explain it away by saying that women are just more emotional and that I shouldn't be so hung up on who was actually at fault. I realized then that they would always be on Ava's side regardless of the situation. To them, Ava was always the victim, and they didn't care about the facts as long as they could maintain the status quo. Hearing them claim to be my friends felt like a bad joke, considering they never once stood up for me. I told them that there was no reason for us to stay in touch, and that our connection ended when Ava and I did. I didn't wait for a response before I turned around and walked away for good. A whole year passed before I heard anything about Ava again. I was in New York for a conference when I happened to spot her on a busy sidewalk. She was standing there by herself, completely lost in thought while watching a stray cat near a park bench. She looked up and noticed me, asking in a soft voice how Cheddar was doing. Ever since I took the cat with me to Chicago, his personality had completely transformed. He had stopped hissing at me and had become my constant shadow around the apartment. The deep scratches he had given me in Seattle had finally healed, leaving behind nothing but faint white lines. I told her that he was doing great and had actually put on a few pounds. She gave a small nod and said she was glad to hear he was okay. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before the conversation died out into a familiar, heavy silence. I checked my watch, making it clear that I had somewhere else to be. I addressed her formally as Ms. Thompson and told her it was time for me to go. I gave her a polite nod, zipped up my jacket, and started to walk away. Ava called out my name and tried her best to force a smile as I walked away. She asked me what I thought of the person she had become over the last year. She did a small turn, stepping back so I could get a full view of her. I took a moment to look at her and told her honestly that she looked well. The Ava I used to know was always guarded and projected a sense of coldness. I had watched her earlier when she stopped to help a street vendor pick up some fruit that had spilled onto the sidewalk. Even when someone bumped into her on the crowded street, she just smiled and told them not to worry about it. The constant look of annoyance that used to define her face was gone. I was genuinely impressed by the progress she had made through her therapy sessions in London. Ava hesitated before asking if I thought she was a better person now. She confessed that she had spent the entire year thinking about me and asked if there was any hope for us. I cut her off and told her that I wished her nothing but the best in finding someone who was right for her. Ava looked down at the ground, the disappointment clear on her face. I turned my back on her and started walking toward the glow of the sunset over the Hudson. The evening light was painting the city in shades of gold, casting a warm glow over the entire neighborhood. I felt a profound sense of peace knowing I didn't have to spend another second trying to decipher her moods. She had finally learned how to be open and honest about what she was feeling. She was finally capable of communicating her needs without resorting to games. The problem was that I couldn't stay frozen in time, waiting for her to grow up. Ava was on her way to becoming a better person, and I was on my way to a better life without her. Even the deadest relationships can provide the soil for new growth, and life goes on regardless of who we leave behind. It took me years to realize a very simple truth about love. The ability to communicate your heart clearly is a gift that not everyone possesses. I promised myself that I would never again settle for someone who didn't value that kind of honesty. I knew then that my best days were still ahead of me. For 7 years, she used the threat of a breakup as a leash because she knew I would always be the one to crawl back. By the time she finally decided to change, I had already walked out of the door and found my own worth. There's a unique kind of sadness in seeing someone finally become who you needed them to be long after you stopped needing them. We are both going to find people who are better suited for us. And that isn't a tragedy, it is a new beginning.